Hi friends, let's talk about getting started with barred instruments, things like logistics and procedures and mechanics. This video is for you if you have barred instruments at your campus, but maybe you haven't had that much training in how to use them. This is also for you if you're playing the instruments at your campus, but maybe it just feels a little bit chaotic and you are interested in taking a step back and kind of rethinking some baseline information and routines. So here are a few things to think about as we get started with these instruments. These are not in any type of hierarchy. It's just a collection of logistics that I think are helpful to have in place. My name is Victoria Bowler. Let's jump in. Let's start with what to call these. Very often, these instruments are called xylophones, and that is true. Some of them are xylophones. Their larger classification, if we are using the hornbostel sax system, is idiophones because they make their sound when we strike them. You'll also hear them called Orff instruments. Carl Orff did not invent these. He did not, build them from scratch, but he was involved in their development, and they are certainly an important part of the Orff approach. So calling them Orff instruments is also correct. I call them barred instruments, and my students call them barred instruments as well. We can also get more specific though. This is an alto xylophone, and that means that it is made out of wood. All of these bars are made out of wood. This is a glockenspiel, and it is made out of steel. And of course, the resonating chamber is made out of wood. And then there's a third type of barred instruments, a third type of Orff instrument, which is a metallophone, and that is made out of aluminum. So now let's orient ourselves to this instrument. Which side is the high side and which is the low side? We're going to do a lot of work with pitch with this instrument. So high and low is definitely going to be really important. Our instruments are shaped like a mountain. So the narrow side is at the top and the wide side is at the bottom. And even when we move the instrument around, the high side is always going to be that narrow side, just like the mountain. So when I do this with students, I say, point to the high side, point to the low side, and they will point, and yes, that's correct, but now point to the high side, point to the low side, point to the high side, point to the low side, point to the high side. Oh, it's down here, point to the low side. Great. Okay, so this instrument being shaped like a mountain or like a pine tree, like a Christmas tree, that can be a helpful image for students to kind of grab hold of in their minds so that they're always aware of where they are in their pitch lineup of high to low. And for me, the easiest way for students to actually start playing with conscious knowledge of high and low is actually to move away from playing with the instrument horizontal, and instead we will put the instrument on the floor vertically. So I'll put it on the floor with the low side next to me and the high side far away. So when I'm looking at it, it looks like that Christmas tree shape. It looks like that mountain shape. And then it's easier for students to know where they are in terms of the high side and the low side. A lot of teachers will also start this by propping the instrument up on a chair so students can see the high side physically high in space and the low side lower on the ground, low on the ground. But when we're actually playing something, doing barred instrument exploration, I like having the instrument on the floor placed vertically. And then we'll transition to a horizontal placement of this instrument where the left side is the low side and the right side is the high side. Next, let's talk about holding the mallets. I ask my students to pinch their mallets with their index finger and their thumb, and then our fingers just wrap around them, and then it's like we're riding a bicycle. We don't ride our bicycle like this. We don't ride our bicycle like this. We're gonna ride our bicycle with our elbows at a comfortable distance away from our torso. What we want to avoid here is playing with our thumbs facing up and our elbows in. We want instead for our palm, for the top of our hand rather, to be facing the ceiling, as if I could draw a smiley face on the top of your hand and you would always be able to see that smiley face smiling at you when you play. So the 3 steps here are pinch, wrap, ride a bicycle. And then in the next video or in an upcoming video, we'll talk about some preliminary play that we can do with just holding mallets and building technique that way before we actually start playing on the instrument. And that's helpful as well. But kindergarten through 5th grade, we pinch, we wrap, and we're riding a bicycle. For playing technique, we want to have a gentle bounce in the middle of the bar. So the important words there are gentle, bounce, and middle. When we're bouncing the mallets, we want to play and then lift off the bar right away. So the idea of a ball bouncing like a true lift is really, really helpful. When we play with a lift, we allow that sound to resonate. It gets to take up the whole room, as opposed to leaving our mallet on the instrument, which stops the sound. And it's also going to get in our way in terms of just instrument mechanics as we are playing more intricate melody lines as students get older. We want to have this bounce so that we can maneuver our way around this instrument with whatever melody we're playing. And if students have a hard time remembering the idea of a bounce, a lift off the bar, we can be a little bit more intentional with our language and tweak it just a little bit. So instead of saying something like play a steady beat on C, we can say bounce a steady beat on C. Little shift in the wording can be helpful to some students. And then depending on which brand of instruments you have, you can also change your language a little bit when we talk about playing in the middle of the bar. This instrument is a Studio 49, which I love. So when I am using these instruments, I say don't play on the letters, because what often happens is if you say bounce a gentle steady beat on C, students on these types of instruments will play at the very edge of the bar instead of the middle. And so that is not an issue if you have a type of barred instrument that has their letter names in the middle of the bar. Great, that makes it that much easier. But instead, we're going to say don't play on the letter names if your letter names are at the very end of the bar. It is so helpful to have signs for different classroom procedures and different classroom routines. So thinking through barred instrument signs that we might want to have would be things like rest position, playing position, maybe a sign for mallets down, maybe a sign to put the mallets in if you have pencil holders on the side of your instrument. I'll go ahead and show you mine. I have these pencil holders that you can just get from Amazon or your local school supply store, and that's where the mallets go when they are not in use. So having a sign for that if it's time to actually put the mallets away, a sign to pass the instrument to a partner, all of these things are really helpful to have. So in my classroom, the sign for rest position is here with my hands on my shoulders. And if I'm holding mallets, it looks like this. If I'm not holding mallets, I can still give that same sign. Playing position is exactly what you can expect. It looks like I am about to play my instrument. And if I'm not holding mallets, it looks like this. Mallets down, if we're just going to put our mallets down on top of the instrument, I go like this. And students know what to do. They just go exactly down on their instrument horizontally. If we are going to be done playing and the mallets are going to go in their pencil holders, I can take my 2 mallets like this and I put them against the resonator box. So 2 mallets, they go against the side of the instrument. That's our sign that our mallets go in our pencil holders. And then passing to a partner, very intuitive. I take my hands and mime that I'm passing to someone on, in this case, my left, but I can also pass to my right. So hand signs, any type of nonverbal communication is so incredibly helpful, even if it's not these exact hand signs that we just looked at. Having some type of visual shorthand so students know what to do next without us verbalizing everything all the time, that is so incredibly helpful when it comes to barred instrument procedures and classroom management. Let's talk about removing the bars from the instruments. For lower elementary students, I tend to set up these instruments myself in whatever pentatone we are using that day, especially at the beginning. But of course, as soon as possible, we want students to have the responsibility for getting their instrument ready to play in whatever pentatone we need to be set up in. And to set up in our pentatone, we just need to take off fa and T of whatever key it is. So that's the nice thing, is that if we know where do is, we always know what bars need to come off, because we can just count up do, re, mi, fa, that one comes out. So, la, ti, that one comes off as well. Now, when students do this safely and respectfully, the instrument gets to stay in really, really good condition for a lot of years. And if we don't do it safely, then we are going to break the instrument. We might break the instrument. This peg right here is the thing that will bend and then eventually someday break off. And of course, that's not what we want. So when we start off here, when we're lifting the bars, we always lift with two hands, one close to us, one far away from us, and we lift straight up. We never, ever use one hand and lift up from there. So if we use one hand, the instrument breaks, and these instruments, this is what we can explain to students, what I do explain to students, these instruments cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and we are very fortunate to have them. And so we need to take care of them for every single person in this class and people in the grade above you and the grade below you and people that you haven't even met yet, who don't even go to our school yet. They are going to use these instruments. And so that's one reason that we need to take really, really good care of them. Okay, I also tell a very dramatic, silly story about having a plate of bacon and eggs if we are setting up in F pentatonic, or of burgers and fries if we are in C pentatonic. And one day, someone handed me a plate of bacon, and I took that bacon with one hand and I tilted it like that. And what do you think happened to all the bacon? Oh, it fell off completely onto the floor. So then I asked for more bacon and they said yes, but they were a little annoyed. So this time I used two hands and I lifted my plate of bacon straight up and it did not fall off the plate. So when we are removing our bacon and eggs, again, if we are in F pentatonic, we're going to take two hands and lift straight up. Okay, great. And then same thing for coming back down. When we put our instrument, when I put our bars back on the instrument, we'll also use two hands and move straight down to put those bars back. Next, physically walking to the instruments. This seems very simple, but it is huge. Unless you have stands for your barred instruments so that they are up off the ground, chances are when students play them, they're going to be along the floor. So it's very helpful to take time and to model and to physically practice how to get to the instruments, how to walk to the instruments in a safe way, because that keeps all of the instruments safe and all of the people safe in this room. In order to do that, here is our procedure. We always walk all the way around the instruments. If I have an instrument here, and an instrument here, we never step through the instruments, ever. We take the long route all the time and walk all the way around. And when I do this, when I model this, we talk about it. And then later in that, we talk about it, we do it, we model it, we practice it, right? And then later in that same lesson segment, I have this silly routine that I do where I show, like I've got distracted by something and I, the teacher, I am going to take this big step over the instruments or through the instruments, and students go, no, walk around the instrument. And so it's a time for me to like kind of ham it up and they catch me doing something wrong. And then I get to say, oh, thank you so much. I forgot. I just got distracted. Which way should I go? This way or this way? It doesn't matter. And so I walk all the way around the instruments and do it correctly. Because what happens is students are going to be walking over the instruments or walking through the instruments. And I guarantee you it will happen that their shoe, they don't lift their foot far enough and their shoe gets caught on one of the bars and either the whole thing gets knocked over or one of the bars goes flying off the instrument. And as we already know, we need to be very careful with this peg so it doesn't break off eventually someday. So having a big foot kind of flipping it over is not what we want. Always walking around the instrument, never over, never through, is something very simple, but it makes a huge difference in the safety of our classroom. The last two things here are less procedures and more postures that we take toward the instruments. And they're postures that end up influencing every other thing that we do. All of the other procedures come from this posture. The first one is a culture of care and respect. And I've saved these for last because they are a little bit less practical, but they're actually the most important. These instruments are really, really special. They have made their journey to us, to get to us in this music room, and maybe along the way they were helped by some type of grant funding, or maybe there was some funding from a particular organization, or maybe there was a community donation, or maybe we had very specific funding from the school. Whatever the case is, they represent a really important contribution to the music program. That's how they got here. And now that they're here, they get to be shared by all of the musicians in the school. So when we take care of these instruments, we are taking care of materials that are touched by every single peer that you have. Like we talked about, every single peer in this room and the grade above you and the grade below you, and even people that you haven't met because they don't go here anymore, or people that you haven't met because they don't go here yet. These instruments are a really important part of our school campus. So all that to say, telling the story of these instruments, telling the story about how they got here and how valuable they are and the role that they play in our school community, those are the things that set the tone for how we approach these as a way to express our musical ideas. It's a really, really special thing. And then we're ready to use them when we show that we are ready to treat them with care. And as teachers, we get to lead that tone by example. And that example plays into our last posture that we are going to take when we are approaching these instruments. We've talked about respect, we've talked about care. It's also important that we keep our culture of play. There is a sense of wonder and awe with how we approach these instruments. And for all the reasons we just talked about, they're really important, they're really special, they're very expensive, but there's also a playful tone here as well. And especially in our first interactions that we'll talk about in a future video when we talk about barred instrument exploration, we can infuse everything with this sense of play. And in those activities, there's time to noodle around. There's time to kind of explore our musical parameters here. And even with those routines that we've talked about, we've talked about the silly story about the bacon and eggs or the burgers and fries. We talked about exaggerating the movement where the teacher makes the mistake and everybody gets to catch our mistake. Even within the procedures, there's a room for a sense of play here. Because as elementary music teachers, we take play very seriously. So remembering to add it to all of these instruments as we are keeping our tone of awe around them, that helps us make our own jobs much more enjoyable. With all of these procedures, we are not going to say them one time and then never touch them again, right? Everything that we've talked about today, it's going to be layered on to playing with all of our other experiences. So now that we've looked at some of the logistics, let's talk about some early experiences of playing these instruments in the next video about barred instrument exploration.